Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss the alternate paths that allow lawyers to engage their entrepreneurialism and distinguish themselves from others, because being a lawyer doesn't have to mean doing business as usual. I'm your host, Jeremy Richter. Today's episode is brought to you by Alps Insurance, the nation's largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance. Founded for lawyers by lawyers over 30 years ago, Alps works directly with your firm, no broker or agent, and if you do have a claim, the Alps claims handling team is comprised of actual attorneys, all with private experience. Alps roots for the law firms they protect. They believe in your success and nurture your endeavors with industry-leading coverage, risk management resources, and accredited CLEs, offering practical advice for pioneering lawyers like you. And Alps has the slickest online application out there. Qualifying firms can apply, see rates, and bind coverage in about 20 minutes. Right now, you can get 25% off one CLE seminar from Alps. Go to alpsinsurance.com/CLE. That's ALPS insurance.com/CLE and use the promo code Lawyerpreneur upon checkout. In addition to the corporate sponsorship that helps pay for the hosting and transcription of the show, you can support Lawyerpreneur on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. For less than the cost of a .1, you can help pay for the time it takes in creating and editing Lawyerpreneur and receive copies of my two most recent books, Stop Putting Out Fires and Level Up Your Law Practice. Now, on to the interview. My guest today is Stephen Embry. He is a litigator from Kentucky and writes about the cultural gap between technology and innovation and the legal profession at his website, techlawcrossroads.com. Steve, welcome to Lawyerpreneur.
Jeremy, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion today, and hopefully we'll have some fun.
Oh, for sure. All right, let's just start with the purpose of your website, which you put out there in your about page. I'm a fairly tech savvy guy. I'm 38. I grew up when the personal computer revolution was occurring. My best friend in high school and I built multiple PCs. We worked at CompUSA, which doesn't exist anymore. And we're able to get parts and put things together. But I'm the guy in my office that people holler for when something goes wrong with their computers. Not that I can do anything for them most of the time, but for a long time I was the youngest guy here, so there was the assumption that I could do something. But I can't help but observe that most of the goings on and the developments in the legal tech sector have very little effect on the day-to-day lives of lawyers like me, who are in the thick of just litigation and practicing. In your writing over years now, have you observed anything that helps you say why that is?
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, a lot of the developers in the legal tech space, while they may be lawyers and they may have practiced for some limited period of time, they don't have the breadth of experience and understanding necessarily of law firm dynamics and law firm financials. One of the most blatant examples of sort of that disconnect is the fact that most lawyers, at least in my world and probably yours too, most of us bill by the hour. Yeah. And you can say that's a blessing or a curse. I tend to think it's a curse, but
yeah, it depends what day it is.
I'm not going to change it anytime soon. But the upshot of that is every hour a lawyer spends, a lawyer that bills by the hour spends trying to learn how to use a piece of legal technology and or spends in training, is literally, particularly if that lawyer is a partner or an equity partner, literally takes money right out of his wallet or her wallet. So consequently, we're very hesitant to spend a lot of time with legal technology that takes a lot of time. And my observation has been a lot of the people in legal tech development create wonderful, beautiful products with all sorts of fancy dashboards. But the problem is it takes forever to learn how to use them on the one hand, and B, on the other, they've got so many features that the lawyer using them gets kind of confused and fed up. The best tech products I've found are the ones that are simple, are intuitive, that don't require a lot of learning time, and that do generally one or two things that help a lawyer out, that reach a pain point or a friction point that a lawyer has. A good example of that is a product that LexisNexis, not to pitch a vendor, but
Sure.
it's their product. I mean, they came out with, and it was, I think it's called Product Liability Navigator, and it's an analytical tool for product liability lawyers. But the way they developed this was they actually went out and talked to some 300 practicing product liability lawyers. Some were on the plaintiff side, some were on the defendant side, some were in-house, some were with small firms, some were with big firms, and they asked these lawyers what they really needed. What was their pain point when it came to product liability litigation? What did their clients want to know? What would help them? And they came up with a product that does just that with a very simple, I don't want to say simplistic, but that's probably the right word, simplistic dashboard that anybody, including me, could understand. And as an example, and I was a product liability lawyer for more years than I like to think. And as you know, and you've practiced in that area, the main thing that a client wants to know when they call you is, what's the exposure of this case? And this product lets you gather data from various sources that give you a more empirical answer to that fundamental question, as opposed to saying something like, my gut instinct is that blah.
Right. Well, and I was sitting, while you were answering that, I was sitting here thinking that, I'm, I guess, complaining, maybe too strong a word, but at least commenting on people creating a product that is ostensibly there to improve the lot or the day-to-day, real world of its clients. And yet sometimes, and I was talking to Brian Cuban about this, well, at the very least, I read it in his book, and I think it was our part of the conversation that we had for the podcast, that, there's a lot of times that with our clients, they come in and we start working on their problems without ever asking them what their problem is, and just start jumping into answering questions that maybe not that they're not answering. So I'm fussing about it, but here we may do the same thing on a day-to-day basis.
Well, and it's the disconnect runs both ways. There's a disconnect on the legal tech development side for lots of products, but on the lawyer law firm side, too many times I've seen law firms sort of delegate technology decisions to their IT department, and not to denigrate folks in the IT department, because without them, God bless them, we couldn't function particularly in these days and times. But they don't have sort of the depth of nuanced appreciation for the problems that lawyers face. And so you've got that disconnect. And then, of course, you've got this kind of death by a thousand cuts in many law firms, where a vendor will pitch to an IT person. The IT person says, that's great, let me take it to my tech committee. They take it to the tech committee. They debate it for 6 months, and then they kick it upstairs to the executive committee, and they debate it for another 3 months, and then they kick it to the managing partner, and the managing partner says, yeah, that's a great piece of technology, let's use it. Well, by then it's outdated, and it won't do what it's supposed to do, or it won't work with the systems that you presently got. So there's sort of blame or fault to go all the way around here in terms of a disconnect. But be that as it may, there are some really outstanding legal technology products out there that work really well. And I could name several, but all of them have sort of this ability for lawyers to intuitively understand how they work and what they can do. I teach a class in law technology presentation skills, and one of the products that we use is the Lit software trial pad products,
Yeah.
and if you use those, I mean, you really don't need to read the manual, right? Somebody said the other day, if you need a manual to know how to use this product, then you've already lost it, right?
Yeah, that
but
sounds right.
but with the trial pad, I mean, you can pretty well figure it out on your
Yeah,
own
for
very,
sure.
very quickly. And so there are lots of products out there like that make our jobs easier. But we as lawyers sometimes we get burned once, we get burned twice, and we quit.
Yeah. Well, let me bring this around a different direction. What about your career, practicing as a litigator for a long time, led you to want to start writing about the legal tech sector and following it and reporting on what's going on there?
Well, I was interested in technology for a long time, and I remember when my kids were young, we were going on a vacation, and I had a brief that I had to work on. And so we're driving to Florida. My wife's driving. I've got papers strewn all over the car trying to write this brief. The kids are yelling and screaming in the background. And so I took a break, and I happened to have a legal magazine with me, and I was kind of turning in. There was this article about Fred Bartlett, who's the well-known Chicago litigator. He'd recently left the big firm that he was with and formed his own firm. But he was talking about sitting in his condo, looking in Aspen, looking out at the mountains as he was working on his brief on the computer. And I said, there's something to this technology stuff. So I got interested in it in sort of fits and starts, and then after I'd been practicing for as long as I had, I was getting a little stale doing what I was doing. I was a mass tort lawyer, still am to some extent, but not like I once was. And I thought, maybe I need a change of substantive law. So I started looking at getting into cybersecurity and privacy, and particularly at that time, there weren't that many experts in it other than on the two coasts, and even those people was a new field. And so I thought, well, the way to get into that is to begin writing on LinkedIn about it. So I started writing on LinkedIn, and then the more I did that, the more it kind of morphed into sort of a little more, some substance, some about technology, more and more about technology. And then somewhere along the way, somebody suggested, why don't you write a blog or publish a blog? So I opened the blog up, and I began to notice that every day I got up that I was going to work on the blog, I was really charged up. And every day that I was not going to work on the blog but had to practice law, I was not so charged up. So finally, 2.5 years ago, I took the plunge and began focusing almost entirely on the blog, although I kept my law license and still do some high-end sort of advisory, strategic advisory work in the mass tort area. But primarily now I'm a blogger. I've got my own hoodie.
There you go. That's the mark right there, right?
I'm ready to go, and I've basically loved every minute of it. It's been a great ride, and I've had a lot of fun with it. I've met a lot of really interesting people, particularly in the tech space. And it was the only regret I have, and I tell people all this all the time. The only regret I have is I didn't do it sooner, because that's kind of where my interests were going. And I really enjoy helping lawyers with technology, understanding it, and getting better use out of it. But I also enjoy helping people that are making the products and helping them understand what it is they're up against, how to design a product that will work, not from an engineering standpoint, but from a functional standpoint, and how to sell products to law firms, which is a art in and of itself. And
Yeah.
so between offering advice to those two sides of the coin and maintaining a blog, I'm pretty busy and pretty satisfied with what I'm doing.
Well, that's really important. And that's one of the things that I focus on here on this podcast and on my own writing is the fulfillment that lawyers can get in pursuing, whether it's a side project or changing professions altogether. There's not one right way to be a lawyer or have a law practice. It can take any variety of forms. But what's really important is that you're able to achieve that fulfillment and satisfaction with the direction that you've decided to go. And it sounds like as you transitioned in your career, you really hit a spot where for the last few years, you're doing exactly that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it took some time. Um, it took some time to figure out what I wanted to do, and then it took some time to, in essence, pull the plug. I was with the same law firm since well, I don't want to say how long because it was a long time. And in our profession, as you probably know, a lot of older lawyers like this. They cannot perceive themselves doing anything different than practicing law, and many of them also can't. Are scared that by changing and no longer practicing law, they will lose their standing in the community, the respect of their peers, all those sorts of things. Um, and I don't mean to suggest those aren't valid concerns because they are. And I struggled with that for a while. Although, I subsequently found that you may trade one set of sort of reputation and respect for another set from another group of people. But if you do quality work, it's still there.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be the thing that drives you in any event. So yeah, I've told lots of lawyers that I've counseled with, of recent times, don't be afraid to step out. I mean, the skills we have as lawyers enable us to do a lot of different things if we're willing to try to do them. Because particularly as litigators, I mean, we learn new subject matters with every new case, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's so we're accustomed to challenges and learning new subject matters, being thrown into situations that we are not entirely comfortable with, and so it shouldn't be that hard. But a lot of lawyers don't. They want to hold back and they're scared, and that's understandable. But for me, it worked out really well. So,
Well, let me ask you this. When you started writing, you were running a law practice, the same as when I started my law blog in 2016. I was a fourth-year associate, so I had different concerns and there were several bumps along the way and a learning curve and trying to figure out what to say and what not to say and where lines are that some can be crossed and others can't. But through all of that, there's the decision of how do I justify spending this time pursuing this other thing, this writing, when I could be, billing or working. For some lawyers who are on contingency or not doing billable work, they still have to justify that time expenditure. I know that
sure.
you wanted to do that. How did you, whether it's to yourself or to your partners, justify that time?
Well, that's a good question. That I think to yourself, practicing law can be very hard and very challenging. Yeah, I mean, and it's between the people on the other side, often your clients, your partners. It's a high pressure, high stress occupation. You can look at the statistics on depression and substance abuse and all that as in essence evidencing that. Having an outlet to do something that you really like to do that may not necessarily be the practice of law, but is associated with the business or the practice of law, if that's what you're interested in, or something completely different, I think for your mental health is important, and it flows into your practice as well, your ability to market, to be able to talk about various and sundry things. I had in today's times where there's so many lawyers and there's so much competition for clients, often you're competing against another lawyer or another group of lawyers that have a lot of the same skill sets that you do, particularly for sophisticated work, because most clients aren't going to solicit proposals from people that aren't qualified. And often it comes down to the best fit between the lawyer and the client. And part of that is being a genuine and interesting person with other interests and other things to talk about, somebody that you want to go have a beer with. I got a huge case one time years ago from a client, and they were interviewing only sort of New York law firms. And I was in a relatively mid-sized firm in Louisville, Kentucky, but we got the work. And after it was all over, I asked the client, I said, Tony, I'm so happy you hired us. It was a very good piece of work, good piece of business. But I'm curious, at the end of the day, why did you hire us? And he said, Steve, if I knew we were going to be working closely together for several years, and we were going to spend a lot of hard nights, late nights together. And if I was going to do that, I really wanted to be doing that with somebody I liked pretty well.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. And to get back to your question in terms of expanding what you're doing and doing things that are a little outside the practice of law or completely outside the practice of law, in my opinion, makes you a better person, a more whole person. And that in turn makes you better able to look at issues with more empathetic eyes for your client, because you're not just practicing law the whole time. You do other things and you see other issues and you see other problems. And so I think it's important for lawyers to pursue those kinds of other interests, even if it doesn't necessarily and directly impact number of hours billed or how much you work or anything else. Work is important. It's what we do. It's what, in many respects, it's what we are, but it's not completely what we are. So I would counsel everybody to try to have other interests. And one of the reasons that I have railed against the billable hour quite often is it tends to make you very myopic in terms of your outlook toward things. A friend calls you with a problem, and that this has happened to me. The first thing I thought is, how long is this going to take? Because I got to get back to billing my time. And before you know it, when somebody calls you with a problem, they usually don't tell it to you like you're billing time for it. They slowly it slowly evolves, and if you're going to help them, you have to be able to take the time. And so one of the problems with the billable hours, it makes us so focused on work that we sometimes lose sight and lose interest in a whole lot of other things that are going on in the world that affects our ability to do good work, even if we don't see it. So, I always tell people, it sounds very trite, and it is trite to say, follow your passion, because, okay, what's my passion? It's a good question, and that takes time to know, but you've got to have that space in your life to do something that you love doing, even if it's different than practicing law. Making that time and making that space, it just makes you a better person, at least in my opinion.
I totally agree. I want to go back to something you kind of touched on earlier. And you and I had a little planning session yesterday about some of the things we were going to talk about today. And you kind of casually threw out there that you've had a 25-year head start on this working from home situation that the rest of us have been forced into over the last 3.5 months, because you've been working remotely since the 90s.
Right.
Technologically, what did work from home as a lawyer look like in the age of landline modems and fax machines?
Well, it was a little slower than it is now. That's for sure. You know, computers ran slower. Wasn't any video conferencing. The internet was still in its infancy, but and there was no. When somebody talked about the cloud, they meant it was a kind of rain day, you know.
Right, right.
So you had to sort of access stuff differently. You know, I hate to date myself, but floppy disks. I used floppy disks for a lot of things. But it was always amazing to me how much you could get done, even in those days, remotely, if you put your mind to it. If you used the telephone, if you used email, if you didn't function entirely in a paper universe. And the thing that I discovered about it when I first started working at home, and I got into it because as a mass tort lawyer, almost all of my cases were across the country. So
Yeah.
I was working remotely because that's where the work was. And then it kind of dawned on me that, well, if I can do this work in Denver, I can certainly do it from a room in my home in Louisville, Kentucky. I had small kids at the time, and I wanted to spend more time with them. And the thing that I quickly discovered about it, even back in those days, was it enabled you to do your work at a time that you picked out, as opposed to getting up in the morning, driving to the office, getting there at 8:30, staying till 6:30 or 7:30, driving home and turning off work. I discovered that I could work at home, and I could pick my kids up from school at 3:30 and bring them home and spend some time with them. And then whatever work I needed to get done that I didn't get done during that time, I could do later in the day. So it added this sort of flexibility to what I was doing, even in those days, that I enjoyed and have always been thankful for. And now that we are facing the situation that we're all in, I mean, thank goodness that technology has evolved to the extent that it has. There's always this sort of debate that goes on, particularly when you're moving from one way of doing things to a new way of doing things, and you're tempted to say, well, that's not as good as what it once. Having a video conference is not as good as talking to somebody in person. And as I've been thinking about this over the past 6 weeks, I've come to the realization that that's the wrong way of sort of looking at it. It's not as good as. It's a trade-off of benefits and downsides, right? Yes, maybe I'm not seeing you directly, but I'm having the upside of much more convenience and ability to do things that don't require me to spend as much time traveling. It's sort of like, I would love to have a limo driver pick me up and drive me wherever I wanted to go and wait on me till I was ready to come home, as opposed to getting an Uber driver to drive me and then waiting for the driver to order it to come back. Yeah, we'd all love that, but the truth of the matter is I can't afford a limo driver, even if there was one available. And what I get in return for using the Uber app is the convenience and speed and efficiency and low cost of being able to do things that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So,
So it
we have
sounds like you've been on the wrong side of the mass torts litigation, or else.
yeah, that's reflecting back on it, you may be right about that. But it's so I think we have to constantly sort of tell ourselves now that we're working remotely and we're doing more things by computer and video conferencing. Yeah, it's not the same. That doesn't mean it's worse or not as good. It's just different, and we have to get accustomed to those differences, and embrace sort of the opportunities that they present. One of the things I've been really enamored with of late is all these virtual conferences that have popped up. And the blessing of them is the cost is so reduced that virtually any lawyer, any associate, any paralegal can now attend. Whereas before, if you wanted to attend a conference, and particularly for you and I, we want to go to a conference in Hawaii or San Diego or Europe, it's a tough sell to our
Yeah.
partners to pay for that. And it's really a tough sell when you're a younger lawyer, a young associate. Now,
Yeah. And, like even you and I were supposed to speak together on a panel in Chicago later this year that has been canceled. And even a place like Chicago, you still have, however many hundreds of dollars the conference is, travel,
right.
hotel. But now those barriers are coming down to, okay, this is the nominal cost of setting up the conference. Plus, if you have speakers that you need to pay, then like you've got that. And that hurdle to having people be able to attend, to hear things that are pertinent to their law practices, or even if it's just something of personal interest, like for me, if I wanted to go to a virtual conference to better my writing career or something, those are things that I have options to do now that there's no way that I would have been able to do before.
That's exactly right. And, we need to look at that, particularly for younger lawyers, because, Lord knows I've been to my share of conferences and eaten a lot of rubber chickens over the years. But particularly for younger lawyers, it's a tremendous opportunity to see speakers and hear things that you wouldn't have gotten to do. Of course, the thing that we haven't figured out how to do is the networking that we all so much enjoy about in-person conferences. But even then, it's there are ways to do it, and conferences are learning and getting better, and so I just think it's a tremendous opportunity. I mean, and let's face it, I mean, a lot of conferences that people go to or used to go to, you'd be sitting in the very back watching the speaker on a big screen anyway. Right?
Sure.
What's the difference of looking at it on your MacBook as opposed to some big screen in a conference room in a huge exhibit hall someplace?
Going back to networking, because I think that's really important. I think it's something that we're all trying to kind of troubleshoot through right now. And so I'll share one of the things that I've been doing over the last few months for my not only clients, but people that I have relationships with in the industry who aren't clients, but, I would like to build up the trust equity that eventually they become clients, is that whenever there are developments, and, one of the things that we've had a lot of developments with in the last couple of months is the business interruption claims and similar claims arising from coronavirus, or, just things that are changing in the legislature that I think could affect my insurance clients. I'll type up a memo and send that off to them. And for me, that's networking in a way that keeps me top of mind, so that if they have something come up in Alabama, I want to be in a position that I'm the person they think of. Because there are lots of good defense lawyers in Alabama and lots of people that they could be sending their work to. But if I am the one who's going to the effort to keep them updated, and I'm freshest in their mind when they think of Alabama, I think that that's a really important way that we can network and provide value to our clients when we don't have the opportunity to see them at an event or, go visit.
That's exactly right. I mean, I have heard several lawyers recently say, well, maybe now is not a good time to be marketing or to be on social media or what have you. And that just, I just sort of recoil from that because,
Yeah,
your competition sure is.
that's
And
right.
if your name is not out there with everybody else's, you're going to get lost because you can't have that personal contact. And I think we all have to realize that as difficult as we are dealing with what we're dealing with, and it is difficult. I mean, I worry and I stress
Yeah,
for what's going to happen. But as hard as that is for me, we have to appreciate it. That is really hard for our clients, particularly our in-house brothers and sisters, who have to deal with a failing business, maybe, or
mm,
budgetary difficulties, or working at home for the first time. And what I found is just a phone call on occasion to some of those people, and just to say, how are you doing? You know,
yeah,
how are you how are you getting through this? And what can I do to help? Let me share an experience, or let me tell you what I'm doing. And I think when I've done that, it has been so well received. Um, you know, uh, they're always thankful, and they seem to really appreciate just that somebody was thinking of the difficulties that they're in. And if you listen in those kinds of discussions, you will learn a lot of their concerns and what they're dealing with, and you can put yourself in a position to help them. But if you don't talk to them, if you, if you don't get your name out, you won't be, and you won't be able to say, that's a really interesting question. I understand why you're so concerned about what's going on in the employment field, or I
yeah.
understand your business interruption concerns, or this is a big one, force majeure clauses.
Yes, yes.
We just threw those stupid things in a contract. That's never
Yeah, who knew that they were actually going to be used?
yeah.
Um,
So yeah, I think marketing now uh, is important, but it has to be done in a way that um, your client knows that you're genuinely interested in what's happening to them as a person, frankly, not just as a business opportunity. My marketing approach for most of my career was very long term. I got a lot of good work simply by biding my time and being there and calling and and going to see people, even though it may not have looked like at the time it would ever amount to much. And so often over time it did. But it's a long, you have to play the long game in
yeah.
marketing even today. And you have to deal with the cards that we've got, which means you can't get on a plane and go see somebody, but you've got other tools and you need to leverage them. So you're absolutely correct in trying to keep that going.
Well, and I think that's really what you said is really important. Being genuine and being personable, and the being personable part, it does not come naturally to all of us. Whenever I call a client, whether it's an adjuster, whether it's um, whoever it is, I tend to be very like business focused about the very particular thing I'm calling about. And but I have tried to make an effort in the last few months to have more personal conversations, um, because people don't have the opportunities right now to have those conversations unless you go out of your way to do it. And I have been more personally engaged with more of my clients in the last 4 months than any time in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
But it does take a conscious effort And it requires you to be genuinely interested, because people can tell if you're just asking a one-off, how are you doing? Okay, let me move into my substantive issue now.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right. I mean, and again, it's again, being being able to have that touch of empathy. As hard as it is, I mean, I don't have the same amount of human contact that I did, and that's hard. But so does nobody else does either.
Right.
And so being able to have that sort of recognize that and know that that's an important conversation starter before you do get into business. It's well received, or at least it's been in my experience, and it sounds like it's been the same way for you too.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought what's going on with businesses and how some folks are having difficulties right now. I'm glad you brought that up in your last answer, because I saw an article that you had recently written on your website that touched on something that lawyers everywhere, I think, will initially balk at. And it's the idea that we might be able to, in this climate and with changes that could be implemented, lower billable rates. It's
Yeah,
the idea that if we're decreasing overhead and other expenses more permanently with remote workplaces and technological changes, we can offer lower billable rates and still be more profitable. So initially, I think people were like, excuse me, I have no interest in charging less money for what I do. But tell me some more about that, because I thought it was really interesting and insightful.
sure. Well, it went back to a virtual conference that I attended a couple of weeks ago for the contract. It was put on by the contract lawyer provider, law clerk. Who, they provide contract lawyers for certain subjects. But they had Ralph Baxter, who was the former managing partner or chief executive officer of Oric, on, and he was talking about just that. The two biggest expense factors for the practice for law firms is real estate, office leases, and personnel costs. And working remotely, you can reduce the former, and using more efficient technological tools, you can reduce the latter. So there's this opportunity to reduce costs and get more business. And the example that he used was, you think about your TV set, right? Your big screen. I mean, those silly things used to cost a fortune, but as they went on, the manufacturers were able to reduce the cost, and then they translated at least part of that cost back to the consumer, driving down the price of the television and selling more TVs. And Ralph gave this example of being in this meeting with a bunch of engineers, and an engineer came running into the room, and he said, guess what? I figured out how we can reduce cost on whatever product it was, the widget. And the guy was applauded. And, it took Ralph a minute to figure out he was being applauded because by reducing the cost, he was going to make more money for the company.
Yeah.
And so there's an opportunity to have that same mindset, particularly when you think about the vast underserved market that there is out there for legal services. And on the one hand, it's an access to justice problem, particularly for people in lower socioeconomic climates and status. But there's also this huge sort of small to mid-sized business marketplace for people that need legal services but don't think that they can afford them. And if we have the ability to lower our costs and tap into that market, it's a huge market. 80% of the legal needs of people in this country are not served. That's a huge market. I mean, we're only serving 20. If we could get to 50, think how much money we can make if we can lower the cost to make it economically viable. And a lot of particularly mid-sized firms are facing lots of competition, and they're all the same, right? And I don't mean that to be insulting to any law firm anywhere. But when you look at the number of mid-sized firms here in Louisville or where you are, a lot of them are roughly the same. They
Sure.
have the same level of experience, same expertise. So how are you going to distinguish yourself in an increasingly competitive market? Well, one way is to pay lower rates. Now, as I said in the article, that's going to take a lot of takes some time for people to get their minds around, even at the client level, because a lot of clients, if you went to them and said, "Got really good news, we're going to lower our rates," they would say, "Well, are you guys in trouble? A bunch of people leave, or what's going on here?" So that could take some adjustment. But let's face it, there's a huge opportunity as we go forward to make a dent and to broaden those markets out and make a lot more money. And will it happen? I don't know if it'll happen, but it's something to think about and something for law firms, I think, to look hard at, as opposed to our typical reaction. When we save costs, we just give it all back to ourselves, right? And we don't give anything to anybody else. And now may be the time that by doing that, we can indeed increase our profits.
All right. Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation. Now that we've made everybody mad, I think it's a good time to wrap it up. So if people want to follow and connect with you, where's the best place to do that?
Go to my blog, Tech Law Crossroads. You can subscribe to that if you want. I'm on social media, Twitter at Stephen Embry JD. You can always email me, sembry@techlawcrossroads.com. And I'm always happy to chat with people about these kinds of subjects, because I just think they're fun. And the legal marketplace for years has been sort of behind the business world, and now we're catching up, and it's a really exciting time, I think.
I think so too. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it too. Take care.
Likewise. Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please take time to rate and subscribe at whatever podcatcher you're listening on. And if you want more from me, you can find me at jeremywrichter.com. You can also find me on Twitter at RichterJW. And if you want the extra audio and benefits available at Patreon, you can become a patron at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.